the most important thing in the console, of course, is the games though. So Wes, what were your favorite games or experiences on the N64?
Oh man, favorite games. Well, I already mentioned Killer Instinct. I'm a huge Killer Instinct fan. Played it in the arcade, which when we talked about Dreamcast, we talked about how Sega's arcade board, the Naomi board, was the same thing that powered the Dreamcast.
Yep.
And when Nintendo put out their arcade board, the Ultra 64, Nintendo 64 had the same motherboard, so it was pushing the same power. So I demolished Killer Instinct in the arcade, and I was so super stoked when it came out on Nintendo. So yeah, so Killer Instinct Gold, even at the $90 price, was one of my favorite games. We talked about Turok. Turok 1 was a great experience, but Turok 2 just took it to a whole nother level because the weapons that you got, playing it in 4-player. My favorite weapon was the cerebral bore. Do you remember that?
I kind of do. Like I played Turok 2 is Seeds of Evil, right? That was the sequel.
Was Seeds of Evil. Yeah.
Yeah, so I never owned the Turok games, but I remember repeatedly renting them, especially number 1 and number 2. I think that the third one, that was on N64 also, wasn't it?
Yes.
I don't think I barely played the third one at all, but 1 and 2 I played quite a bit, and the weapons in that game were awesome. The second one, you're right, was a huge step up in the first game, but the first game was on, I think it was an earlier N64 games also, so it was like, oh my god, this is like a first-person shooter on a console. Like, this is crazy. This was pre-GoldenEye, was it not?
Yes, I want to say Turok was pre-GoldenEye. Turok 1.
I think it was. Yeah, I think the first one was. So it was like, oh my god, you're playing like a first-person shooter on a console. Like, this is crazy. It's actually working.
And the areas were, especially with Turok 1, the areas were huge. Again, everything was in 3D. So that was great. What else was my favorite games? The Star Wars games, because we had a couple of them for 64.
Classics.
Shadows of the Empire, third-person adventure game, set in times of Empire Strikes Back. That was great. Then we had Rogue Squadron, which was with the X-wings that used the expansion pack.
Yes, it did.
We had Pod Racer.
Oh man, yeah. Pod Racer did come out on 64. I prefer the Dreamcast one, which I mentioned in the other show.
I do too.
But the N64 one was definitely playable at the time, because the Dreamcast one, I think, came out like a couple of years later. So like, if you only had the N64 one, unless you played in the arcade, that was the best way to play it outside of the arcade.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Pod Racer. That was great. And we had Winback. Winback was the I want to say it was a ripoff of Metal Gear. It tried to be Metal Gear because it had that espionage stealth type, but a little bit more on the action side. But I remember playing it, and I enjoyed it. I was like, wow, this is actually pretty decent.
A painful truth is I know exactly what Winback is. I remember reading it in magazines, and I never got around to buying it at the time, unfortunately. So I never even rented it, never played the game before. And, people have told me I need to pick it up and check it out. I've got to get that game at some point. I definitely need to give it a go around, but I've never even had the experience with it yet.
Well, they re-released it on PlayStation 2, so you can find it for PlayStation 2.
Oh, I think I kind of remember that, but I don't.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to go back and see if I can find that.
Yeah, Winback was pretty good. Extreme G. Extreme G Racing. Oh, that was fantastic.
I mean, it's basically Extreme G, if you guys don't know, is F-Zero with motorcycles, essentially.
Oh, and weapons. It was very Wipeout-ish.
Yeah, that's a good way to describe it.
And I loved Wipeout. But yeah, where they were like if anybody that's listening or watching is familiar with Tron, they were like these little Tron style motorcycles.
Yep.
And you picked up weapons as you went on, just like Wipeout. But one of the cool things were after you hit a certain speed, you would break the sound barrier and you would hear like a light rumble, and then the whole game would go silent.
Yep. Until
you crashed, and then sound would kind of revert back to normal. But no, Extreme G 1 and 2, loved them. And then we had Conker's Bad Fur Day.
Oh, I mean, when we get into the rare classic, stuff, man. I mean, this was like Rare's heyday. Like Rare put out
Yes.
so many amazing games in the N64, and I think if I'm wrong, somebody can correct me, but I believe Conker's Bad Fur Day was their last game on the N64. It was a late release, and it was something totally different from Rare at the time.
Yeah, because they had previously put out Banjo Kazooie, which was fantastic, very kid friendly. And there was a lot of rumble about Conker's Bad Fur Day. All the gaming magazines kept, talking about it. And then it came out and it had a mature 17 or older sticker on it.
But it still looked like a Rare game. It still
And
looked like a cute little platformer, but it was rated mature.
it was rated mature. I remember a lot of disappointed kids. They had to get turned away because I couldn't sell it to them. They were not
I think
me.
I had my parents buy that for me at the time.
It was for those who don't know, Conker was he was a squirrel, so it had the cute aspect, but it had pure adult overtones, a lot of sexual innuendo, a lot of like fart jokes, and it was Conker was a really good platformer though.
It was a really good platformer. When you start out the game, I was like, again, pretty young when this came out, but I was probably like a young teenager or something like that, and I thought it was so cool because when you started out the game, Conker was drunk and he had a hangover from like the night before, and that's how the game starts out. It's like you don't know what happened to you the night before, and then he's like cursing and stuff immediately as the game starts. It was hilarious.
Yeah, and then the whole the bee stage where you had to quote unquote pollinate her and the
Oh
queen bee,
God.
and it was we were like, oh my God, we're playing this on the 64.
It was crazy that Nintendo let that happen because they had, even at that time, they had such a family friendly image. I think today they're a little bit less reserved than they used to be, but I mean, it was crazy that they let that come out. I think Rare was in such high standards for them that they were like, they were just like, you can make whatever you want, we don't care.
And it sold like crazy at the time.
Conker today is a pretty expensive N64 game if you have a complete in box. Like it's a pretty sought after game at this point.
Oh yes, it is definitely sought after. If you have a complete in box, it's a hefty penny. I see it every now and then come into the store at Level Up, but it's I don't see it often now.
That's another thing about N64 games, which is this is close to the end of that era. Like GBA was like really Nintendo's last era of having cardboard boxes, but once they started like getting into the GameCube and stuff like that, and they made plastic cases, people actually started keeping their cases. But at this time, people still got rid of their cases and just kept the cartridges. So that's why you'll see a big swing from like cartridge only to complete in box in those games.
Yeah, definitely. Other than that, I think I have one or two honorable mentions. I had I'm trying to think what else. It had 64 did have Wipeout, which I already mentioned that I loved it on the PlayStation. They did have Ridge Racer, a version of Ridge Racer, and I again loved Ridge Racer, the drifting racing game that was popular on PlayStation. So there were a few, but those were my standout games in my library.
Wes, are there any other honorable mentions you want to give?
Yeah, one more. It was a Japanese import game called Sin and Punishment.
I have the sequel on the Wii.
Oh, see, I never played the sequel for the Wii. I loved the first one. Running gun shooter. It was fantastic. It was so good. Because Die Hard Gaming Magazine covered imports, and as I mentioned before, I was a big on import games, and they kept talking about it. So I wound up importing it, and it was worth every penny. Sin and Punishment. Yeah, that was good game. So yeah. Other than that, that's it for me. How about you? What's your gems?
Well, I mean, the biggest one we already talked about, so I'm going to skip over speaking that again. But Super Mario 64 was the reason I bought an N64. And out of all the games in existence, if any game should cost $1.5 million, it probably is Super Mario 64. Even though it's not actually worth it, it probably is because it's like the best game in the world. So. Some other notable mentions on here from my experiences. There's a lot of rare games on here. So let me go through some of the minor ones first. I'm going to call them minor ones just because I'm not going to spend a ton of time talking about them. 1080 snowboarding. I own it today. I
Oh,
did
so
not.
good.
I didn't own it back in the day, but Wes, I don't know how many. This is again, when you're a kid, you don't have a lot of money. I don't know how many times I rented 1080 snowboarding.
Oh man, how could I forget that off my list? That was so the snow physics. What?
I went back and played it probably, I would say I played it like a month or two ago. And
Ooh,
it
how's
doesn't hold
up?
up that well. It's rough, man. It is rough around the edges for sure. But you know, if you kind of like put yourself back in that time, you're like, yeah, I can understand why this was so good. But if you gave it to a younger person today, you'd be like, what are you talking about? Like, you guys like this game? Like I can imagine them saying that to me, and I would understand that they didn't understand it.
Yeah, you know, that's it's such a shame that the current generation is kind of missing out on the experience of seeing something for the first time.
But you're an old schooler, man. You probably raised your kids right. You probably showed them like the old school stuff first, didn't you?
I did, and I tried. Some took to it, some didn't. So
Yeah, I mean, I guess you can't force them, but
nah. My son mostly. My daughter could care less. You know, she was all about the Barbies and the pound puppies and all that other stuff. And then my other daughter, same thing. You know, now she's the gamer. Now she's all about Destiny and all that other good stuff. They like the new stuff. Me, the old stuff, man, brings me back.
If you don't mind me asking, if you don't want to talk about it, that's fine. May I ask how old your kids are, approximately?
I have adults, man.
You have adults. Okay.
I have adults.
Good. I already kind of knew that, but I wanted the audience to know that.
Right.
Are they nostalgic for stuff from when they were kids the same way that you and I are nostalgic for like the really retro games, like the NES games and the Genesis games and stuff?
My son is.
Okay.
My son kind of goes back and remembers, you know, playing with me or watching me play, you know, the old games, you know, because he grew up on the 64. So he remembers playing those games. My daughter's no, not so much. My one daughter is a big gamer,
but she just likes new stuff.
She likes the new stuff. She likes Destiny, you know, Monster Hunter. She likes the new stuff. My son really isn't. He enjoyed the old stuff and seeing it, you know, he remembers it and it brings him back and has those fond memories. But he doesn't actively go back to play the old stuff like I do.
Gotcha. At least he has an understanding of where it came from, and he can, like, you know,
he can relate to it. But
for sure,
like me, I'll go back and I'll play it all day long, and I'm just as happy. I'd rather play the old stuff than the new stuff.
I mean, I'm getting to that point too, and this is kind of a newer thing that's happened with me in the past few years. Like, I definitely still play. I obviously play new games. I showed some off to you, but it's like here, Cruis'n Blast came out this week on Tuesday or Wednesday. I think it was Tuesday. It was the same day that another game that was brand new got like 10 out of 10s, like across the board. Everybody's playing the new Bethesda game that just came out. And here I am buying a Cruis'n Blast game on the budget price of $40, you know.
Which game
and that's where I'm at today. I'm skipping the big, like, you know, 5-star review, 10 out of 10 games to play something that's like, oh, it's an old school arcade game. That sounds awesome. Let me go play that instead.
Which other new game came out?
It was you go back in time.
Oh, that game.
Deathloop. Yes. Oh. So that game's getting like tons of like great reviews right now. And I couldn't care any less. I'm just like, cool, Cruis'n Blast is out. WarioWare. I'm gonna go play those instead. I'll get Deathloop in the future when it's like $20. Plus, here's my other thing with Deathloop. Just a quick tangent. Xbox owns Bethesda.
Mm-hmm.
Deathloop is a timed exclusive on PlayStation. If I wait patiently, probably 1 year, it'll come to Xbox, and all the DLC that they decide to release for the game will probably be included in the Xbox version. So I'll just wait and get that one.
Okay.
I'm tired of buying these games and then they put out special editions and stuff like that. Like, I don't know. I'm becoming way more cool with like waiting on stuff than I used to be. Some other titles I got on here. Let's see. Let's talk about the racing games really quick, since that we just talked about Cruis'n Blast. Cruis'n USA was a classic N64 game. I did play this first in the arcade, which I loved it, which is why I wanted it on N64. And I would say it wasn't as good as the arcade at that time, but it was pretty damn close.
It was good, because I believe that also ran off the Ultra 64 motherboard in the arcade, didn't it?
I don't remember.
I don't want to say it did.
It's very possible that it did, because that was the only system it got ported to. Cruis'n wasn't on anything else but the N64, at least at that time. And then there was also San Francisco Rush, which was another comparable thing. Like, absolutely fantastic in the arcades. The N64 version was almost as good as the arcades, not as good because there's probably more stuff. And obviously you have a steering wheel, stick shift, but San Francisco Rush was a blast to play as well.
I was going to ask you, what's your thoughts on the Rush games? You got Rush and you got Cruis'n.
Oh, I like them both. I can't pick and choose. I do like them both. I would say, I want to say it was San Francisco Rush 2 or 2049. It was one of those where they had like a stunt track. And I don't know how many hours I put into that stunt track on N64, but it was a ridiculous amount.
Yeah. Yeah. As you're talking about Cruis'n, Rush popped into my head. They were good. They were really good. They were fun.
Yeah, they were outstanding.
What else you got on your list?
So I'm just gonna keep kind of trying to go for like some of the odder stuff that I don't play as much today, but I used to back then. So there was a Ken Griffey Jr. baseball game that was fantastic. It was Major League Baseball featuring Ken Griffey Jr. That at the time was like the best baseball game. Like, I played the hell out of that baseball game, and I was still in the sports. Back then, obviously, I was still playing baseball and stuff. Did you ever play that game?
For a hot minute. I kind of gravitated towards All-Star baseball. From Acclaim.
I remember that. Come on, man.
I know.
Really?
It looked nice. Shiny graphics.
I remember that game. That's why I'm saying that. If you guys remember from back then, this is another example of Wes saying, "Oh, it was fine." Like, yeah. Well, it wasn't that fine. Ken Griffey Jr. was 10 times the game.
It probably was.
Baseball was.
It was.
And then segueing from sports to sports entertainment, WCW versus Nwo Revenge was my game of choice. I know a lot of people like No Mercy. I never got to play No Mercy, actually, even to this day, which is a shame. I need to go back and pick up No Mercy. But this is truly the golden age of wrestling games for video games. I mean, these games were unbelievable. Even today, these are considered the best wrestling games of all time. Have you played any of them?
I did. I'm trying to remember. Was this during the Attitude Era?
It was right around that time. I think the Attitude Era was started. It was because on N64 there was a game called Wwf Attitude on N64, made by a different company, which wasn't the good company. You wanted the ones that were made by
THQ.
THQ published them, but TDK or ATK, one of those things. ATK,
the one put out by THQ.
Yeah, THQ was publishing them, and they made WCW versus NWO, and then they made that was World Tour was the first one, and then Revenge was the second one, and then something happened and the license flipped, and then they started making WWF games, which is when they made No Mercy, and that's why everybody loves No Mercy, because that was the one that was published by THQ also. Yeah.
No, I do remember. The WCW games were good. They were enjoyable. Had my Big Papa Pump in there.
Oh yeah, man. That's right. You got the Wolf Pack. Hulk Hogan was in there.
Yeah.
Hollywood Hogan.
Hollywood Hogan.
Then we have some games published by Nintendo that I loved. There was Mario Kart 64, which at the time was clearly the best Mario Kart game. People kind of don't talk about it as much anymore. That people really talk about Double Dash on GameCube, which I don't understand. I'm not that crazy about Double Dash. It's a fine Mario Kart game. I thought the N64 one was better. Do you have any affinity towards the 64 version of Mario Kart?
Mario Kart to me is always Mario Kart. It was fun. It was enjoyable. You can the fun thing with the 64, it had the 4 ports for 4 players on one console.
Oh, of course.
That
was huge.
That made Mario Kart so much fun. So yes, Mario Kart for 64 was, I preferred over Double Dash.
Me too. And I also, to make us feel super old real quick, the internet was kind of a newer thing at that time. This was like 1990, probably like 97, I would say. Mario Kart probably came out, maybe 98. So the internet was there. It was a thing, but people weren't really utilizing it the same way that it was today. And there was a Nintendo Power had a contest where there was a specific track. I think it was like Mario Circuit or something like that. If you beat this specific track and like you get the fastest time and you took a picture at the end and like sent it in, you could win I think it was a gold like Mario Kart 64 controller. And there was only like so many of them made. And I remember taking a picture and sending it in because I had like a really good time. I remember playing that track like a million times. Of course, I didn't win, but I was like, I thought I had a really good speed. At one point, I took like a disposable camera, took a picture, had to go get the picture made. Then I took the picture, physically mailed the picture into Nintendo, to whatever thing they had to try to win this contest. And today, you would just take your phone out, take a picture of the screen,
and then upload
it on a website and send it to Nintendo. They'd have it the same day, like within just a few minutes.
How times have changed.
Definitely. But speaking of Nintendo games, another one that was big from Nintendo was, of course, Ocarina of Time. This is another game that really made me love the N64. This is my favorite Zelda game too. Like even up to now, I do love Breath of the Wild. I think it's probably my second favorite Zelda game, but still nothing holds a candle to Ocarina of Time. That experience was totally crazy. And being in 3D, the first time you went out into Hyrule Field, there was nothing like that.
All right, I got to share a little secret, and y'all don't judge me.
Don't do it.
But once the 3D Zeldas came out on 64, I have never completed a Zelda game.
Wes,
I know the community please don't take my card and don't judge me, but it's I know. It's I start them, I love them, I'll play them, but at the time there's too many games coming out and my attention span isn't that long to play Zelda from beginning to end. So I always get distracted by the next shiny thing. And
I can get that.
And Zelda kind of gets pushed to the back in favor of like the other games that don't take as much time. So to this day, I have never completed a 3D Zelda game. The old ones on Nintendo, Super Nintendo, yes, those I beat from beginning to end, but the 3D ones I have never done. So
all right, so since we're sharing stories of embarrassment, I've never completed an old school Zelda game. I'd never beat Link to the Past, and I never beat the original Zelda. And Zelda 2, I effing hate, so you guys can come at me for that. I know a lot of people love Zelda 2, but I can't stand that damn game at all. Like, I'm never going to beat it. I have no interest whatsoever. But the original Zelda, I should have beaten, and I never have. And the same thing with A Link to the Past, which A Link to the Past is disgraceful. It's an abomination that I've never beaten that game.
Oh, man. Nah, the old school Zeldas I love. But like I said, it's just once they hit 3D and I love them and I think they're fantastic games, but I'll get 20, 30 hours in it. And then, like I said, I kind of get sidetracked and it gets put to the side and I never go back and finish it. So,
I mean, for me, when Zelda games come out, everything else gets pushed to the side. That's usually what happens with me. It's like, oh, new Zelda, cool. Nothing else matters. We're good. We're done.
It's on my bucket list, believe it or not. So I promise I will finish. I will finish them at some point.
Just beat Ocarina. It's probably, I would say Ocarina is probably easier to digest than the openness that Breath of the Wild has. So, I mean, Ocarina is still like, it's an open world, but it's kind of linear. It's like, there's still like a finger pointing you like, this is the way to go. Where you go. Where Breath of the Wild is more like, where do you want to go? You might be able to do this. Can you do this? I don't know. Definitely play Ocarina of Time, Wes. It is okay. It is amazing.
Oh, I've played it. I just haven't beat it.
Did you at least get to the point where he like takes the sword out and he's like older?
Yes.
Okay.
And I think that's where I stopped playing.
Oh, so when the game got good, that's when you decided to stop playing.
That's when I kind of put it down.
Not that it wasn't good before. Everybody knows what I mean. Like the game got like really good at that point. Everything turned to like a dark world, and like you've seen like the whole Hyrule environment like change. Oh man, I was blown away at that time. Oh man, so good. So that was another one. Obviously, the last one I want to mention that we kind of talked about briefly earlier was Star Fox 64. What a wonderful experience. We already talked about the branching paths and everything you can go down, the rumble pack being in there. And I love the cheesy voice acting in this game. Like usually that kind of turns me off, but the cheesy voice acting in this game is like just so perfect. Like it just fits in so well for some reason. And then finally, I got just a couple more here. Banjo Kazooie, one of my favorite platformers of all time. Banjo Tooie, which was the sequel, I've probably started that game 5 times and I've never beaten it. I don't know why. I don't know what it is. It never convinces me to beat the game. But the first one, I don't even know how many times to beat the first one. Probably like 5 or 6 times.
Oh, the first one was great. Oh my, it was so good. So good. Everything about it was good. Rare was like at the top of his game. And again, that's kind of why we got Conker. But no, Banjo Kazooie was, oh man, it was so much fun. So much fun.
And then we had the shooters. I mean, another reason outside of Mario 64 was GoldenEye. I played so much GoldenEye. I couldn't even comprehend how many hours I put into this game. I'm still to this day probably will dominate most people in there. I played it, all throughout middle school into high school. And then I didn't play it for like a few years. And then when I was in college, N64s were like dirt cheap. So I picked one up from the store that you and I worked at. And I picked up another copy of GoldenEye, brought it back to my condo at the time with my roommates, and we would play that game till like 3 o'clock in the morning, tons and tons of times, over and over again, just screaming at the top of our lungs. It's amazing how many times we did not have the cops called on us. Like we should have had the cops called on us like every other night.
Oh, the single player I loved. I did beat GoldenEye. The single player mode, it was so much fun with the weapons and the gadgets you get, and then I didn't jump on the multiplayer until like later, like way later. When
really?
Everybody else was like so good and I sucked. So, my friends would come over and they'd say, "Hey, let's play GoldenEye." It's like, okay. And then they were already like so much better than I was because I didn't have anybody really to play with. So, I didn't want to like beat up on my kids all day. So.
Yeah, I mean, I at least had always one person around, somebody that would play with me, and I just got really, really good at the game. And a lot of the game is memorizing, where the body armor is, which characters are better and stuff. Like Trevelyan, I think if they never showed you the stats on screen, but I think Trevelyan had like a slightly faster speed to him. I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing his name wrong. That's how I've always pronounced it. I have no idea if I'm saying his name wrong. But I think he was just a little bit faster than the other players. And Oddjob, of course, is very short. So he had an advantage because you walk into a room and where your gun's pointing you always had to look down to shoot him. So it always took a second. So whoever was not good, they got to be Oddjob. Like that was their like handicap basically, like in golf.
And then if you happen to get the golden guns and
oh yeah, well that's just learning like the respawn points and all that. And I had all that stuff down, man. I knew where the body armor was, knew where the good weapons were. When the game starts, it's a race to whatever good weapons were in that round. Proximity mines were tons of fun. Hiding them.
That was fun.
Oh man. Oh,
that was fun.
It like a dirty trick I used to do all the time was I would pick up body armor, throw down a proximity mine, and then when the body armor would respawn, it would be on top of the proximity mine so you couldn't see it. So they would go to get the body armor and explode. Oh my God. Such good times.
Good times, man.
And then there was Perfect Dark, which came out after that, which was essentially the sequel to GoldenEye. They didn't have the rights to James Bond anymore, so they made their own thing. And Perfect Dark was also excellent.
It was good. It lost some of the excitement that GoldenEye had. I felt
it did,
but Perfect Dark was still in its own right a good game.
Yeah, they made another, espionage first-person shooter, female lead character, and they made their own story out of it. Joanna Dark is the main character, and it was built off the engine that GoldenEye was made off of. So you're getting like GoldenEye, you're just not getting all the Bond licenses and the Bond characters in there.
And there was, Joanna Dark, like she wound up cultivating like a huge following. So there's people that got much love for Perfect Dark. We got the sequel on 360. you know, and to this day they're talking about another Perfect Dark coming. So I'm curious to see what that's going to look like.
Yeah, so Perfect Dark got announced about, I want to say it was about a year ago or so. It's going to be an Xbox exclusive title. Of course, Microsoft bought Rare, so they have the rights to Perfect Dark. Rare is not making this game, however. This game is being developed by a brand new, what Microsoft is calling a quadruple A studio. What is their name? Oh my gosh. The Initiative is the company, and they're supposed to be, you know, like a whole bunch of, you know, bigger people from like different studios and stuff coming together to make this game. And Perfect Dark is supposed to be like a next, according to Microsoft, a quadruple A experience. So this is going to be something that's supposed to be completely groundbreaking, but they barely showed anything of the game. I'm very reserved in my feelings towards it. I don't know how it's going to turn out yet, but I think it's going to be good. And the reason I think it's going to be good is they're not stupid. They understand if they're saying this is a quadruple A game and then they announce that it's Perfect Dark, that they just took the level of expectation. Like, you can call it a quadruple A game, but now you add that it's a quadruple A game and it's Perfect Dark. You just brought it up to, this better be the best first person shooter that has come out in the past 20 years, at least in my eyes, by them saying those two things. You know, do you agree with me, or do you think I'm crazy?
I have faith in Microsoft because for years I have been dying for a Killer Instinct game for years.
Oh, yeah.
I'd go to E3 and I'd go to Rare. It's like, you know, I felt like Bart, like, where's my Killer Instinct? Like, where's my Killer Instinct? Where's my Killer Instinct? You know, and my friends would laugh because I'd ask for Killer Instinct. We'd go, when we were at EB, we would go to the conventions and where's my Killer Instinct? And then when the Xbox One launched, I got my Killer Instinct. And it wasn't made by Rare. It was made by another company, Helix, I think. And it was top notch. It was so good. So if Microsoft can do that with Killer Instinct, I have faith that they're going to do the same thing with Perfect Dark.
I think so too. It's just such a, like, it's way too ballsy of a statement to make. Like, I don't know. I just said, I'm not going to repeat myself again, but it's just, I don't understand. They can't say that to the community and then be like, oh, it's an okay shooter. Like, no, you don't say what you just said and then say it's going to be like an average shooter. No, you just said you're going to deliver the most groundbreaking shooter since Halo. That's what you just said to me without actually saying those words, in my opinion.
I got faith.
They better deliver. Otherwise, I'm coming at them. All right, so then we got one last game to mention on here. Now, this game came out late to the N64. It was still a good game on the N64, but its origin state was on PlayStation, of course, which was this was really weird when this came out, but this I think started kind of where Capcom started making some games for Nintendo. This would go into the GameCube, where they made, I think it was called like Capcom 5 or something like that, or 7. There was a number tied to the amount of Capcom games that were going to come out exclusively to the GameCube. And I think this might have been the beginning of this, because they released Resident Evil 2 on the N64, and it came out much later in the N64 than it did on the PlayStation. But I think it sold pretty well, and I from what I remember, it reviewed pretty well as well.
It did. Now I'm trying to remember. My mind escapes me right now. If it required the expansion pack, I can't remember if it did or if it didn't.
I don't recall either, but I'm gonna say no on this one. I don't think that it did, but I'm not sure.
It played well. It looked well. It looked just like, you know, the PlayStation version. Yeah, I was surprised when it came out. And again, it was super expensive, what I remember.
Yeah, I don't recall its exact price, but I mean, it just off the top of my head, it was probably like $70. It was probably $69.99, you know, at release anyways.
Yeah.
I think that one's like a kind of a harder to find N64 game too. Not like extremely hard to find, but like kind of sought after, kind of expensive, not something you see every day.
That's for sure.
Uncommon.
It was pretty uncommon, you know. I mean, like you said, it came out the end of the 64's life, so there weren't a whole lot of copies produced. It's one that we do see in the store from time to time. It's usually cartridge only, but to find one in box and, you know, complete in box it's kind of rare.
Yeah, I can imagine that for sure. Because I mean, at this time, I think this would have been the time, like Resident Evil 3, I believe, was already out on PS1. And they're releasing Resident Evil 2 on N64, like, around the same time that Resident Evil 3 came out on PS1. So it's like, what the hell are you doing? Like, where's Resident Evil 3 at? Of course, that never came out on N64.
Yeah, I'm curious. I'm real curious now to see what that's worth.
Oh, so I'm guessing you're checking it now over with our good friends at Game Eye.
I am. Yes, I am. Let's see. So Nintendo 64 complete in box. Resident Evil 2. Okay, it's going for about $153.
That's almost exactly what I thought. I would have thought it would have been a little bit more, like maybe 170 or 180, but that was in the ballpark of what I thought it would be complete in box.
Yeah, it's a little lower than I expected. I thought it'd be a little bit more. Sealed, you're looking just at 280. So, it's not too unrare, but uncommon.
What's a loose one, like maybe $60 or something?
45.
Oh, yeah, even cheaper than what I thought. That makes sense.